Well, I think we can all relate to that song, that sometimes we're just trying to get through the week to get to the weekend. Am I right? Yeah, okay. Well, welcome to Kensington. I'm so glad to have you here with us today. My name is Shauna, and I'm the production manager here. And I hope that you are having a great Labor Day weekend. It's kind of that last hurrah of summer, which is hard to believe. But we have some great things planned here this fall. In 2 weeks, it is going to be our fall kickoff on September 16th. And we are excited. We are going back to 3 services. So take note here, 11 o'clock service. You guys are going to have to pick. There's going to be an 8:45, a 10:30, and a 12:15 service. Also, on the 16th, we are kicking off a brand new series this fall called Intentional Acts of Kindness. And I hope you all received one of these little invite cards on your way in today. If not, just grab one on your way out. But these are for you to invite your friends, neighbors, coworkers. Maybe today you're at lunch and you have a great conversation with the server. Invite them to come check it out. Come to see what the series is all about. I'm sure many of you at one point were probably like coerced, or someone was like, hey, you should come check out Kensington. And you were either like, I don't know about that. Or maybe you were excited, who knows, but aren't you glad that you were invited to come here? And so we were just asking that you guys pass that on. There's more cards, so you can grab some more. We'd love to see you just fill this place up, and this will be an exciting series. Now, as the fall kicks off, we also have all of our courses and groups start back up again. We have a wide variety of community groups that meet here at Kensington, and these truly are just a really good way to get connected. Sometimes you can come in here on a Sunday morning and it just feels like a really big room. I have found personally that when I've gotten involved in like some community groups, whether it be Bible studies or women's thing or who knows what, that's when I truly meet people and I get some friends, and it feels like this is more of a family than just a big room of strangers. So I would encourage you to stop by the hub after service today and talk to the team about how you could jump into a community group this fall. Now, if it's your first time here, we are so happy to have you here, and I invite you to also stop by the hub today. We have a special gift, and it's just for you, and our team would love the opportunity to meet you. The hub is a place that you can just discover more about Kensington. So you can ask any questions you might have, you can find out what's going on, and some of the upcoming events that we have. I do want to make everyone aware of that this fall, on September 21st, it is going to be our fall leadership gathering, and we're meeting at the Troy campus. Who here has attended one of our leadership gatherings before? Awesome, yeah. These are a great event for anyone to be encouraged and be refreshed. And what the coolest thing I think about the leadership gathering is, it's all the campuses coming together. And so this is a time for you to just get recharged as we head into the fall and to be challenged into the things that God is doing in and through you and through the ministries at Kensington. So I encourage you to check that out. You can go on the website to learn more about that. Now, before we get any further into the service today and into our message on work life, I invite you to stand up and greet those that are around you.
All right, well, good morning. I'm excited that you're here. I hope you're excited as well. You've arrived for part number 1 of a 2-week series we're in called Work Life. And of course, you know, being Labor Day, it's pretty appropriate. But today we're talking about all forms of work. Work that we put ourselves to, that we get paid for, and even some things that we do that we don't receive work for. But the reality is when we put our time and energy and efforts towards something that feels like work, it could be daunting. Sometimes it could be consuming. It could be draining. And quite honestly, we've all probably worked for places that we don't necessarily even enjoy, but yet it's a big part of our lives. Did you know that the average human being will spend 1/3 of their lifetime working somewhere, which is over 90,000 hours putting into this thing called work in life? And so it's a big part of who we are, but it's also connected to us on a deeper level as well. And I would say we're going to build a case that there's a reason why that it's connected on a deeper level. This next song that you're about to hear is written by a guy, Bob Rector, who is a very famous guy who gets driven around a lot of places to go to concerts and play. And so one day he was paying attention to that, and he decided to write a song about it.
Harbor drives a minivan, just the cruise ships from Fort Lauderdale, and it's been that way since 1994. He does his business on a flip phone with the most obnoxious ringtone. I didn't ask, but I could tell he's from New York. He spoke proudly of his daughter, and that this fall she'd be in college, that he'd always wished he'd gotten his degree. You could tell he came from nothing, built a future out of hustling, and somehow I'm the one your people pay to see. Oh, celebrate it. Oh, how am I the only one who knows I'm half the man of the men that drive me places? Danny showed up early, 15 minutes till 5:30, making sure that I'd be on my morning flight. He said he loved to fix computers, but that he can't until he's fluent. So he spends his driving money taking class at night. He wore a neatly ironed dress shirt, and he helps his kids with homework. And deep inside I couldn't help but ask myself why that night I'm up on stage and everybody knows my name, while Danny's early picking up somebody else. Oh, isn't that just the way it goes? You're dealt a good hand while you get celebrated. Oh, how am I the only one who knows I'm half the man of the men that drive me places? Yeah. Now everything's not given. I work hard to make a living. I'll give credit when I think the credit's due. And maybe you've been dealt a good hand, maybe you played it the best that you can, but I don't know how far you walk without those cards and Howard or Dennis working shoes. But that's just the way it goes. You're dealt a good hand while you get celebrated. Oh, how am I the only one that knows I'm half the man of the men that drive me places? Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm half the man of the men that drive me places.
That's an incredibly compelling song, isn't it? I said it was Bob Rector, it's Ben Rector. And he wrote this song, and it makes us think, because oftentimes we don't really think or contemplate maybe perhaps in those ways. And I love it. It's so haunting and yet so admirable at the same time, where he said, you know, you get dealt a good hand and you get celebrated, and am I the only one that knows that I'm half the man of those people who drive me places? And it's amazing to think about how connected we are to what we do for a living and how it makes us feel. And today, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about a lot of this material comes from a book by Tim Keller, Every Good Endeavor. If you want to find out more about the topic today, go home and download the book, Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller. But today we're talking about just that. We're talking about what does it mean to spend 1/3 of our lives and working in some way, shape, or form, and what does God have to say about it, and how is it a big part of what we do? How should we view it? How should we change it? All these different things. So as we dive in together, I would love to pray, and would you pray with me as we get started? Father, we thank you for this day. Lord, I thank you for every person in this room today or listening online. And God, I thank you that we have the privilege of meeting here this morning and to gather together and to find out what you have to say about this topic in our lives. So God, I pray that that's exactly what would happen, Lord. I pray that your Holy Spirit might work and that we would listen from your word and that you would speak into our lives. Father, there are so many people who are experiencing so many different emotions around this topic. There are people who are discouraged about their work. There are people who love their work. There are people who are wondering if it counts or whether they get noticed, or they're wondering about advancement or financial security. And Father, all these different things attached to this part of our lives. But Father, more than anything else, Not only do we want to hear from you, but Lord, we want to walk away responding and living in how you want us to approach this area of our lives. So Lord, we thank you and we ask and pray all these things in the powerful name of Jesus Christ. Amen. We're going to take just a moment and receive our offering as the ushers are coming down. I just want to say this. If you're visiting with us here today, don't worry about this moment because the first couple visits are totally free. So, no, just kidding. No, seriously, don't worry about this moment. It is a moment designed for people who are part of Kensington. If you're part of Kensington and you come here and you consider this your place of worship, we encourage you to give financially because for two reasons. It's the way that God designed us in our faith, and it's also the way that God designed the church corporately. It's a part of our individual faith giving. We're supposed to give back to what God has blessed us with, but also the way that God designed the church to move forward. We accomplish more together than we can individually. So we're actually very careful to say thank you every time we pass the offering, whether you give here or online, because we thank you for trusting us in our leadership as well. So as that is passing, I want to ask a question. How many of you know what it's like to work in a place that you don't necessarily enjoy? Raise your hand. All right. Now, how many of you are sitting next to your boss and you actually had the guts to raise your hand? Excellent. Good job. So, I haven't told this story in years, but when I was growing up in high school, I worked at a little place called Chuck E. Cheese. Is anybody familiar with this place? And believe it or not, I was a lot of different things. I was in the game room. I made pizzas. But for a large part of the time, I dressed up as the rat. And by the way, it's not a mouse. I know what you're thinking. You're saying it's a mouse. It's actually not a mouse. I kid you not. I worked there. Go home and Google this. It is a rat. Unbelievable, right? So even on the schedule, it would say like 9 to 5 rat. And so you'd get up and you'd dress up and it was really hot and you'd put this big Chuck E. Cheese head on and had these big eyes that were like screens that nobody could see in that you could see out. And it was incredibly hot. And Chucky lived in the kitchen. He just popped out every once in a while. And I mostly stood there for pictures, but you get to pet kids on the head and wave hi and you have this built-in smile. But the weird thing about Chucky is when you're Chucky, you can't talk because Chucky has his own voice and it would be weird. So they just tell you you're not allowed to talk. So I just found out something when I became the rat. When I did that season, I discovered something. Kids are mean. Kids are really mean. I'm not kidding. I mean, this was horrible. I mean, I was just a kid myself, and I just had this horrible view of kids because I would walk out, and kids would like try to pull my tail right out of my costume. They'd poke my screen eyes and try to bend it. They're playing tricks on me, trying to turn my head. It was just terrible. I remember one kid, man. This kid was just absolutely awful, and I just kept on thinking, man, this kid needs to get his own. And so one time he was up, I saw him climb up on top of that, that plastic ball pit, and he's standing on the edge, and there's like a really thin, like a net, that's kind of separating us, and he's on the inside, and I'm on the outside, and he was standing there ready to jump on his friends, and I walked by, and I made sure nobody's looking, I was like, boom, and just hit him. Boom, and he goes inside the balls. He gets up, and he's like, Mom, Chucky pushed me, and she's like, stop lying. I'm like waving and smiling. So, but I remember one day I was in the back of the kitchen, and I had 5 managers, which I can't still understand today, and it was not a very good place to work. It was a hostile environment, at least it seemed that way. And so one of my managers told me to make a closing announcement. They said, get on the microphone, make a 10-minute closing announcement. Well, every time that you make an announcement, you're supposed to tap on the microphone, and you're supposed to preface it with this phrase: attention, attention, boys and girls. Chuck E. Cheese would like to see number 15 come pick up his pizza at the window, that kind of thing. And so I remember, turning on the microphone, and she was standing right there, and I tapped on the microphone, and I said, attention, attention, boys and girls. Chuck E. Cheese is closing in 10 minutes, so he wants to see you get your things and head toward the door. And so I got done, and then she pulled me aside, and she just screamed at me. Stood there in front of me and just screamed, and she says, don't you ever tell these kids that Chucky wants to see them leave. Chucky is their friend. Chucky would never say that. Chucky is their pal. Chucky lives in the kitchen. And she's just going on, and I'm just standing there taking it, and all my friends are standing behind her, where they make the pizza, and they're making faces, and they're laughing, and she just stands there and chews me out. And listen, when you get chewed out, 30 seconds is long enough, don't you think? Maybe a minute, that's a long time to get yelled at, right? For 5 solid minutes, she's just yelling, and there was other things coming out, and it was just terrible. All these other things she's just getting on me about, and I'm just thinking, this is terrible. And so she goes, now, you get back on that microphone right now, and you make a proper 5-minute closing announcement. I'm like, okay, so I walk her the microphone, and she hovers over me. She's just standing like this. So I'm standing like this, and she's literally, her face is right here, and she's just looking at me. I'm like, okay, I've got a choice because this is not a good situation for a person with my personality. So I'm like, and she's standing there and all my friends are laughing. And I'm like, okay, I got a choice to make. So I turn on the microphone and I said, very clearly, I said, attention, attention, boys and girls. Chuck E. Cheese is dead. And all the kids are like, ah! And she's like, you're fired. And I'm like, no, I quit. So I took off my shirt and I threw it off and I went in the back, got in my car, and it was wintertime and it was snowing and I had no shirt on, drove home, and that was the last time that I worked at Chuck E. Cheese. All these kids are like, ah! So it was terrible. It's terrible. Good times, good times. So let me see if you could complete this sentence, all right? Let's finish this phrase for me. Thank God it's Friday. Very good. All right. Now, how many of you said, thank God it's Monday? Anybody in the auditorium? Nobody did, right? Thank God it's Monday. Although that'd be funny, wouldn't it, to see one person just enthusiastic. Thank God it's Monday. Can't wait to work. Woo! Most people don't say, thank God it's Monday. They say, thank God it's Friday, because on Friday, for a lot of reasons. Number one, maybe it's the day I get my paycheck, and I'm going to go spend it. Or Friday is, like the opening song, working for the weekends. I have most fun on the weekends. Or maybe for you, it's thank God it's Friday because I don't have to put up with this commute or, this cubicle or another lecture or some annoying coworkers, or I don't have to see my boss. Or, thank God it's Friday because the best thing is I don't have to be at work until Monday, right? And so we go through that and we think, thank God it's Friday, because work can sometimes feel pretty daunting. Now, before we go any further, let's take just a moment and let's define what the kind of work is that we're talking about. So the definition, according to Webster, is this: work is any activity that we engage in where we expend energy to accomplish or achieve something. So certainly that means, commuting somewhere or working out of your house and receiving a paycheck to do a job. Certainly that qualifies as a definition of work. But it also qualifies for a stay-at-home parent who stays at home and, doesn't get any necessarily financial compensation, but yet has one of the most challenging and most rewarding and most important jobs that there is. It also includes a student who works really hard at expending energy toward getting a degree. So all of this is work. So regardless of what form of work that you're a part of, if you don't run toward that work every day with a thank God it's Monday kind of attitude, I want you to at least feel okay just knowing that you're not alone. In fact, Gallup recently did a survey in 2017, and look what it says. In a 2017 Gallup poll, they found 85% of the world's 1 billion full-time workers don't like their work. Now, first of all, does that seem high to you? It seems pretty high, doesn't it? I think I know more people that enjoy their work, but I'm not sure what they're talking about. But 85% is so high, but yet at the same time, when I think about all my conversations with people, it's really not that far off. So the percentage in the article said this: 62% of people were not engaged, that they were completely checked out, that they would come in, and they're probably in the category of like, hey, I don't hate my job, I just don't necessarily love my job. It's a job. I do it well, and I'm fine with it, right? So they're completely not engaged. They were included in this 85%. They're the ones that just kind of check out, and they don't put extra effort toward it. The article also said that 23% are actively disengaged. These were the people who hated their job. 23% of people hated their job, and they were actually, they would do things to, irritate their boss or their coworkers, and they would act out against them. And then, which leaves us with only 15% of workers are actually engaged in their work. 15% are gonna be passionate and strive for innovation and move their organization forward. So I think of a lot of things when I read an article, because Gallup is pretty credible, isn't it? When you read an article like this, you think to yourself a lot of things. Number one, you're thinking, if I'm a boss and I have somebody that I would consider in the 15%, here's an idea: pay them well. Hang on to them, reward them, pay them what not only they deserve, but pay them what more than they deserve, because that's a pretty rare thing apparently to find, right? But also I think of this: when I consider all the conversations of the people that I have, with people who say, I don't necessarily enjoy what I do, and I think about how God created us and how life is short and we go through life, and when thinking about this, I ask this question. It's a very important question. Was it meant to be like this? I mean, from the very beginning, when God created humanity and when we were, meant to go through life in these 77 years that we have on the average, by the way, of, living and dying, was it meant to be this way? right? After all, people seem to somehow think that maybe work is a part of the curse after the fall. You know what I'm talking about? Like when God created Adam and Eve, he created paradise where everything was perfect. But then sometime in the book of Genesis, sin entered into the equation. And then when sin entered the equation, everything changed. And God said, there's a curse on the land, and you're going to have to work and toil and all this. So they think that all work is a part of the curse. As if Adam and Eve, let me say it another way. If Adam and Eve didn't bite the fruit, would all of us right now just be sitting around every day, relaxing and having a great time and having all of our needs provided? Isn't that a great thought? And so that's a question. Is work a part of the curse? Was it meant to be this way? Now, when I think about that, all I have to do is think about my own life, and I spent most of my life working. My mom and dad were divorced when I was 10 years old, and I have done every load of laundry myself up until I got married. But when I was 10 years old, up until I got married, I was happy to pass that job off to my wife because I did most of that as a child. I cut grass for money. I had chores at home. They were passed down. And somehow they went from Chucky to Donnie and then immediately just kind of skipped over the other brothers and got all the way down to me pretty quickly. So I carried all of those. I had a paper route when I was young. I worked at my mom's bar and bingo place. And when I was young, I held most of my jobs from 10 years old all the way up through college. And then I figured out that since college, I've only had like 5 different jobs, if you can include the 3 churches that I've worked at, plus 2 jobs in between. And so when you think about that, I totaled them all up before today's talk and discovered that I've worked at 21 places. 21 places, right? I've worked in construction. I've worked as a waiter. I've worked as in the fast food industry. I've had 6 jobs where I've been a salesman. I've actually, goodness gracious, just all sorts of things, right? And I don't really know of an existence without working really hard. And so when you think about that, you think about working for money and retirement and budget. I did the budget the other day, and I sat down. And this is always a great thing when you're ready to present this budget to your family. You can start off with this phrase, honey, if you think about it, all a person really needs are 3 things, food, shelter, and clothing. Isn't that right? We only need 3 things. So based on the budget, here's the good news, honey. You get to pick any 2 of those 3 things that you want. Any 2 of those 3 things. So you're welcome. Congratulations. But when it comes down to it, you and I, we spend a lot of our lives working. And so the answer to the question is this: is work a part of the curse that God gave to the world? The answer is a resounding no. That God actually created us and designed us to work well before the curse and the fall, well before sin entered the equation. In fact, from the very beginning in paradise, we were designed to work, and we were a reflection of a God who also works. And so when we decide to take a look at the purposes of work, well, it'll help us to, number one, very important, to start to view our work, whatever it is, differently. It'll actually change how we work. And most importantly, it could help us have a value and discover a value and a purpose in our work that perhaps we never knew before. Now, we're going to look from the very beginning in the book of Genesis. It was written by Moses. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in this book by Tim Keller, The Good Endeavor, Every Good Endeavor, one of the most powerful things that it starts out with is that it says, in the very beginnings of the Bible, the very words used to describe God and to introduce God to us, the next word is a verb. It's an action word. Look what it says in Genesis verse number 5. It says, verses 1 through 5, excuse me. In the beginning, God, and there's the verb, created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was all over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. Nope. Go back one, please. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And so in the beginning, it says that God created. Now, the word for created is the Hebrew word melacha. the word for work. In fact, every word in Genesis referred to as work. It was written in the original Hebrew word melacha. And I want you to know that the words used to describe God working are the same words used to describe man working. When God gave man jobs and assignments and tasks and man and woman, Adam and Eve, that it's the same word melacha. That God, we see in Genesis 1 that God worked. Now, that's important because God didn't necessarily have to work, right? This differentiates him from all other gods. Like in the Greek God world, it was believed in the golden age that neither God nor man worked, but yet we're introduced in the Christian faith to a God who is working. And so it's interesting because it means for us that God isn't afraid of work, that God didn't create us to work for something that he isn't willing to do himself. But that word melacha is the same thing. Not only does God work, but it's really important to know that God does the same thing we do. After he's done with a good job, he sits back and revels in a job well done. So look what it says if you skip down to verse number 31. It says, God saw all that he made at the end of the chapter, and it was very good. How many of you do this like I do? When you get done with a job, immediately after you're done, if you've done this all by yourself, you immediately go grab your wife and say, come look at the good job that I did. Anybody? Anybody do this? Really? Are you serious? Are me and this guy the only guy? Raise your hand if you really do this, all right? Very good. All right, see, you just didn't want to admit it. All right, that's a lot of you. Because I do that. I work really hard, and then I'll clean the garage, for instance, right? And then I'll call my wife, I'll say, Liz, after I'm done, come look at this. And she knows her role. She knows it. She's like, okay, she'll get right up. She'll walk in. She'll stand out there. She'll look at the garage, and she'll go, honey, what a good job you did. Good job. I'm like, I did do a good job, didn't I? She's like, you did a good job. I'm like, all right, good. That's all I want. That's all I want is for somebody to say, I did a good job. Just give me a pat and let me go my way because, I just think that there's pride in a job well done. And I think that a lot of us can relate to that, whether we have our wives or husbands or children affirm us or not. The reality is that there is something that resonates with everybody about a job well done and looking at it. Well, I believe it's a reflection of God. In the book, Erwin McManus wrote a book, The Artesian Soul. And in that book, it's based on the premise that God created us in his image and he created us as creators. That actually, every time that you and I put our minds to it and we either create or work toward a task or create a movement, that's actually a holy moment. That it is a reflection of God. And because we are made in the image of God, here's what I believe. Every time that I call my wife out and say, hey, look what job I did, I believe that is a holy moment. Because that is a reflection of exactly what God has done, and it's what he designed us to do. So here's what we discover. From the very beginning, there's 3 different areas or categories. The first one revolves around who we are, and this is the truth around that statement, that work has been connected to our identity from the beginning. That work has been connected to our identity from the very beginning. That God gave Adam and Eve a task. He told Adam, name all the animals. That God gave action words and a to-do list to Adam and Eve, and it's a part of who they are, and it's a part of who God is. He designed us, and so when we work, I believe that we are living out a primary and essential part of our lives, and it's a large part of who we are as individuals. How many of you know this? Have you ever heard the statistic that when people retire and they stop working and they do nothing and they sit on the couch, that their health decreases? Anybody ever hear that, right? And some of you have experienced that, right? You've experienced that firsthand. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't work to retire and all these kind of things, but in a healthy way. But when people stop doing anything, and when they just stop being productive and they stop, putting their mind and hands towards something, I believe that it's woven into who we are. There's a reason why our health fails. I'm not against retirement. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm going to have to be able to spend my time doing things because God created us that way. I actually wrote down a couple quotes, and let me read them to you. So there's a British novelist, Dorothy Sayers, in the early 20th century who wrote this: the desire to make or do something and feel the final satisfaction that our work is very good, it's a part of our identity. This is not primarily a thing one does to live, but one lives to do. And I believe that is the case. And so when we see that God gave Adam work, look what it says in verse number 28. God says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And every word highlighted here points toward action. It points toward a to-do list. And Adam and Eve were created to work, and so are you, and so are we. And just know this, I don't know what you do for a living, whether you get paid for it or whether you're a parent or whether you're a student or anything else that I did not cover, but I do know this, that whenever we put our time and energy towards something, when we connect it to, this is how God made us, that this is a reflection of who we are, and that this is what I'm designed to do. It changes our perspective, it renews our motivation, and it gives us energy knowing that this is who God is, and it's who He created us to be. There's a second category, and it has to do with serving others. And the truth reads this way. Almost all work can be viewed as, connected to, and even made to serve others. Now, I was careful to include the word almost, because I do know that there is some work that even, no matter how far you connect the dots, maybe it's not connected to any person, any other person whatsoever. I also believe that there is some work that's just bad work. It's just not good work at all. But I would say almost all of all work can be viewed as, connected to, and even repurposed or made to serve other people. And it's actually one of the purposes of work. We are created to serve other people. So let me ask you this question. How do you view your job? Do you see it as a necessary evil? Like a necessary evil that like you have to do it to pay the bills. You have to do it to, the daily grind, all that stuff that that has to happen through your job. But what if we decided to think about work differently? What if we decided to repurpose our work and we said, you know what? I'm going to go to work and I'm going to internally view it as something that God created me to do. It's a reflection of who He is, and I'm going to somehow use it to serve others. Whether it's just an internal perspective change or perhaps even creatively we figure out a way to serve others. Why? Because it's who we are called to be. If we think of work as ourselves, our finances, our promotion, everything, number one, it becomes about ourselves, but number two, it's very frustrating. It can become meaningless, and it's very self-absorbed, and there's a lot of energy that gets drained when we think about it that way. But if we thought about our work, about serving God and serving others, we can start to live out who God has called us to be, getting creative and finding ways of somehow serving other people and living out the values that God has called us to live out. Look what it says in Acts chapter 20, verse number 35. Paul is talking about his work, the work that he did. And he says this, in everything I did, he's writing back to the church of Ephesus, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak. Remembering the words that Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than receive. Now, keep this up here for a minute. The reason why I highlighted the kind of work that Paul did, because Paul did both ministry work and vocational work. I don't know if you know this, but in Acts chapter 17, it says that he did both ministry in the temple and also in the marketplace. And you'd say, well, that's easy for Paul because he was a missionary, he was a church planter, and he was a minister, so his work was that kind of work. That is not the work he's referring to. In the marketplace, Paul was a tent maker. And he did this for a variety of reasons. He references it all the way through the Gospels. He was a tent maker because essentially being a full-time paid minister wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even a thing that was invented yet. And so Paul did not want to be a burden to anybody. He didn't want any excuse whatsoever because, after all, he was the number one person to bring the gospel to an unbelieving world. So he took a job as a tent maker in order to serve others, in order not to be seen as a burden. And if you read through the scripture, you will find this phrase. Paul said, I did my work so I wouldn't be a burden to you or your church. And Paul did everything, and he never refers to himself when he refers to his tent making. He says, I did it for the benefit of serving others. And you and I can find a way to serve others with the things that we do. Let me give you another quote here. This quote here is, that is not what I have. Here it is right here. Okay. So there is a Simon Sinek. He's an author and organizational consultant. And he wrote this. He said, if you want to feel happy, do something for yourself. But if you want to feel fulfilled in your life, do something for someone else. I think that there are many ways that we can learn to leverage our position in what we do. Even if we make widgets for a living and we stand in an assembly line, to connect it either internally or externally to serve others is a high value, I believe, that we can do in our work. So I'm going to call out Linda Davis. Would you give her a round of applause as she comes out? So Linda has been coming to Kensington for how many years?
Almost 20.
Almost 20, and Mike?
Almost 20.
Yeah, almost 20, yeah. And so 20 years at Kensington, and I knew her story. She is a district court judge in Clinton Township in Macomb County.
I am.
And given my past, who would have ever thought that I'd be friends with a district court judge?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a story I hear a lot of times.
I'm sure you do,
Okay.
yeah. That's so funny. But she has an amazing story. So just tell us kind of what you do on a daily basis and then what happened, and then it led you to do something for others. So just give us your story.
Okay, so I've been a judge in Clinton Township for almost 17 years now. And it's very rewarding work, but about 12 years ago, it really shifted for me. We had a number of young people that were coming into my court on a regular basis that were in the throes of opiate addiction or heroin addiction. We had never seen this before in Macomb County. We had 9 young people that lived in my neighborhood that had died of opiate overdose within a year period of time. 2 of those were kids that I knew very well from our community that were 17 years of age. And then I also had my own personal battle, not me personally, but within my family with addiction, all at the same time from a family member that I would have never, ever thought would have been involved in drug use or abuse. A lot of these kids got started because of legitimate reasons, an athletic injury, a wisdom tooth being pulled, but they found themselves in the throes of addiction with nowhere to turn to. So some of us in the community decided to get together and do a town hall meeting in the basement of a little church in Fraser, Michigan. I went there as, quote, the authority person. I had no intention of sharing my own personal story, but that night I was nudged to come clean and realized that if I didn't share what was going on in my own life, I was never going to be able to help other people in their lives. So that was my first nudge to do something proactive. And I got a lot of nudges. God had to be very patient with me because I was a slow learner. There were lots of nudges that were going on, hospital visits where I was shamed, made to feel like I was somehow at fault for what was going on in our family, watching how people with addiction get treated. It was a horrendous 3 years of my life. I'm fortunate in my story, however, because my loved one is celebrating 9 years of recovery. Thank you. But during the course of that time, I found a system that was very broken and a lot of families that were left with no resources or anywhere to turn. So we started an organization called Families Against Narcotics. We now have 21 chapters in the state of Michigan.
That's awesome.
34 support groups for families that are looking for help and advice. I'm looking out at one of the nurses that's involved in our group, and she is involved with the Hope Not Handcuffed program, which we launched about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a program that involves 69 police departments over 8 different counties where someone suffering from addiction can walk into those police departments without judgment, say they're sick and they need help, and one of our over 600 angels would be called to meet you there and to make sure that you get into recovery that day or the next day at the very latest. In the 18 months that we've been doing this, we have placed over 1,600 people into treatment, and some of our,
awesome.
Thank you. And some of our nursing staff have even taken it into the emergency rooms of hospitals. So this just keeps growing, and it's definitely a God-led group.
And I know you don't want to say this, but I'm going to ask you to say it. So you've been called to Washington a few times. Tell us about that.
I have. Because of the amazing group that we've done in the state of Michigan, we've really received state and national attention. I was asked to chair the governor's opiate commission, and we have effectuated over 25 pages of amazing changes in the world of addiction. And from leading that position and also being involved with Families Against Narcotics, I've been invited to the White House on 5 different occasions to meet with the First Lady and the President to talk about what do we need to do in our community to change addiction and how we look at it. So I've been very honored to lead this group for 12 years. It's a volunteer position. I do not get paid to do it. But I really feel like so many people live their lives without really knowing what their purpose is. I remember one of my loved ones' counselors telling me, someday you'll look at this as a blessing in your house. And I thought that person must have been on drugs to even say that. But in all honesty, this has been one of the biggest blessings in my house because I wake up every day knowing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
And isn't it something how God can take the worst parts of our lives, because you would say that's the worst part of your life probably, right?
Without a doubt. Yeah,
and turn it into some of the best blessings.
It really is.
And it's amazing that God does that. And so... And that's so incredible. 2 things I wanted you to mention real quick. Number one, you had said you learned to view people who are addicted a different way instead of morals versus a sickness.
Right.
Would you say that real quick?
Yes, so many people look at addiction as a moral failing, that this is something people choose to live a lifestyle. Nobody chooses addiction. It's a horrendous way to live life. You lose your loved ones, you lose your job, you lose your education, your money. It's not a choice, it's an illness, and we as a community need to be part of the solution and getting rid of the shame. Shame is what stops so many people from entering the world of recovery, and there's hope in recovery. I work with thousands of young people across the state of Michigan that are now working in the world of addiction, that are working for Disney as artists, that at one time in their life, if you had looked at them, you would have thought they were nothing but a junkie. We need to lose those terms and realize these are sick people that need all of our support.
Yeah, to view them like someone who has cancer. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then the last thing I would love for you to tell us is, so if somebody's here and they're inspired to either get connected to Family Against Narcotics or Hope Without Handcuffs, and if they were to just want to get connected to it either for themselves or somebody that they know in their family, or if they even wanted to perhaps even volunteer, where should they go?
Right. You can go online to HopeNotHandcuffs.com if you want to volunteer to be an angel, and all of you are qualified. All you have to do is be compassionate and non-judgmental, and we'll teach you the rest. The other thing is, if you are a family member or if you are a person who is seeking recovery, you can go to FamiliesAgainstNarcotics.org, get connected with our group. This is a family illness, and we oftentimes leave families out of the equation. When I started getting better and got into treatment, my loved one got better right along with me because they no longer could manipulate and enable, and it's really important for families to get connected with support.
So you didn't have the addiction, but yet you went to treatment because it's a family disease.
Right. We get addicted to the person we love that's addicted.
That's right. That's right. Do me a favor. Would you give her a huge round of applause? Thank you, Linda. God bless you.
Thank you.
You're so wonderful. So wonderful. It's awesome. So obviously, that is someone who, in our community, who leveraged what they did and said, okay, I have this position, I have this 9-to-5 job, and I'm going to repurpose it, and, volunteer my discretionary time and use it to serve others. Now, for a lot of us in here, you may be thinking, you hear a story like that, you're like, I can't do that at all, especially if you work out of your house and you work by yourself. But listen, I got to encourage you and say that sometimes even an attitude internally of serving others is enough. Even an attitude of saying, how can I look at that which I do and serve others and do it to the best of my ability, even if it's somebody indirectly that you're serving, to serve others. And then perhaps if you work with people, that somewhere along the way you can say, how can I serve the customers that I interact with? How can I go above and beyond? How can I live out the values that God has called me to live through this 9-to-5 or whatever hours you keep job that I have and this work that I do to serve others? And when we begin to internalize and realize that we can serve others, and then even perhaps taking steps toward something like Linda, starting small in a church. Who would have ever thought starting in a church church would lead to all the things that she has done. And yet God sometimes uses us and says, start to serve others, and maybe he'll even birth in us serving others and it turning into something a whole lot bigger than we thought. But viewing our job as somehow connected to serving others is where it starts. There's a third category, and it's the category of worship. And the truth is this, that work is primarily a form of worship to God. That work is primarily a form of worship to God. Look what it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Now, I highlighted these words, to work it. That word in Hebrew, work, is the word avada. Avada is a term used to describe the work that God gave to mankind, and yet that word has in it embedded the idea of worship. The word avada is translated as the work of worshiping in other places. Let me give you an example. In Exodus chapter 3, when God was giving Moses a to-do list, Moses had a very large to-do list, and to take his people out of Egypt, the bondage of Egypt, and to lead them back and find the new promised land. And God gave Moses a lot of things to do. Look what it says in verse number 12 of chapter 3. This is an example that God said to Moses, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. That word worship is the same word avada. And it's the task of worshiping, or to work at worshiping. And so whether the word avada is translated into work or it's translated into worship, what we understand is that these two are closely woven together. And the idea is that when we work, and when we work to the best of our ability, when we give it all that we have, the Bible even says in the New Testament that even though that others may not see our hard work, that none of our labor is ever in vain in the Lord. That God sees everything we do. And even if what we do in private, and we strive for excellence, it is a form of worship to God. Paul even talks about worship, working for human masters, but having an entirely different motivation. Look at Colossians chapter 3, verse number 23. Paul says, whatever you do, work at it. There's that same word, avada. Work at it with all your heart. And that Greek word, all, you know what it means in Greek? It means all, okay? Work at it with all your heart, giving it everything you have as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Now, when I was highlighting words on this verse, I was going to highlight working for the Lord as to, kind of give us the motivation for us. But I decided instead to actually highlight this last phrase because that's more of a surprise, isn't it? Like, not for human masters. In other words, what are you saying, Paul? Are you saying that every time my boss gives me an order that I can't stand, and I'm actually angry that he gave me that order, are you saying that I'm supposed to give it all that I have, not because of my boss, but in spite of my boss? Paul would say yes. Are you trying to say that every time a customer walks in through the door and it's a customer that's, not deserving and they're irritating, or maybe it's a client that I have that's giving me a hard time, are you trying to say that I'm supposed to bend over backwards and give it all that I have as working for the Lord, not because of the client or the customer, but in spite of them? Paul would say absolutely. Because everything you should do as an act of worship, knowing that as you serve others at your job, it says it's an act of worship. We should serve them as we serve the Lord. And that gives us an entirely new perspective, doesn't it? Because when we decide to approach our work from the stance of, this is a part of our core identity, regardless of what the work is, I'm designed to contribute. I'm designed to live a life of significance. And when we attach identity to what we do, all of a sudden the meaninglessness, if there is meaninglessness, if there is, all of a sudden goes away, and we attach ourselves to a greater purpose in our lives. When we decide to leverage that job and serve others, or have the attitude of connecting to serve others, and especially when we decide to know that God is honored and pleased with a job well done, and it's how He is and it's how He created us, all of a sudden then we don't say we get to work because we have to. We get to work because God has called us to work. And all of a sudden we say we get to work because we were created to work. And our purpose goes up. And then maybe, just maybe, we'll get to the point of our lives Can you ever imagine a time where we would say, thank God it's Monday? Okay, no, probably not. But maybe, right? Because this is who God is, and it's who he called us to be. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together, and I pray, Lord, that you would help us to recognize just who you are and who you created us to be. Father, I can't even pretend to understand everybody listening in this room or online, Father. We are in all different stages of this thing called work. Lord, I pray for the person who is radically discouraged. Lord, that you would please speak courage into them, that you would send them an angel themselves, Lord. Just surround them with others who would encourage them and be there for them. Father, I pray for the bosses in here who perhaps don't pay their employees what they deserve, that they would be challenged by the 15% of employees that are worth it, Lord, to take care of them. I pray for the person in here on all sorts of different levels, Father, for the person in here who maybe works so hard and thinks that nobody notices, or maybe they know that nobody notices. I pray, Father, that you would help us all to know that, Father, you don't miss a thing. That, Lord, it is worshiping you, and that worshiping you can be and should be enough at times. But, Father, I do pray that others would notice. Father, I pray for the person looking for work. Pray for the person who just desperately wants to provide for their family. Lord, that you would shower them with blessing and take care of them and provide for them financially. I pray, Lord, that perhaps you would even challenge us to take care of others out of our abundance and provision to help others who are struggling along the way. Lord, whatever it is that you're challenging us to, whatever it is that you're calling us to, however it is that you want us to serve others through this thing called work, I pray, Lord, that you would birth in us now a nudge that would eventually turn into something where you would do a great work in us and a great work through us. Because, Father, this is a big part of our lives. Lord, help us to know and understand the purposes of work. Lord, we know that sin has distorted our perspective of work. And, Lord, we know that sin has distorted our purpose of work. But, Father, today we reclaim those purposes in your mighty and holy name. Amen.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you, oh, we live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you.
I was watching these guys play, and I was thinking to myself, this is a great example of using what you do for God. A lot of these guys, they play professionally, and they earn a living in some cases by playing. A lot of these guys gig, on Saturday night, and they're out really late, and they get up early Sunday morning, and they come in and they serve. And there are so many different ways that we could take what God has gifted us with and what we do and leverage it. And this is a perfect example of them using their gift of what they do for a living for worship. I was thinking about Priv. Priv, how long have you played here at Clinton?
About 10 years.
About 10 years. Isn't that awesome? I started to think, I was watching him play, and I thought, I can't even remember a single Christmas or Easter where he wasn't jamming behind me during the closing song. In case you didn't know who this is Ethan. Ethan is new on staff, probably since Easter, right? And yeah, he did a good job, didn't he? But this isn't his primary work-paying job here. He is the lighting director. He's in charge of all lights, and then also a lot of the ministries are going to start in the fall in the Great Room, and we're going to run that thing with a volunteer basis. Well, Ethan's in charge of the Great Room with all the tech in there. So if you want to be a part of a ministry and run that, this is your guy for that. We're very thankful for all these guys. Thank you. I want to go ahead and challenge you with one more thing before I let you go. And that is, if you haven't been handed an invitation, please know that the invitation for this series coming up in 2 weeks called Intentional Acts of Kindness, these things are printed out, and I hope that they're not going to be somehow discarded. I hope that you and I will feel in the weight of the ownership of saying this one card represents perhaps even an entire family or an individual that I can invite with me. Intentional Acts of Kindness is going to be such a great series because we named it that because we've all heard of random acts of kindness. Well, we're going to approach this series by saying, what if it were more than that? What if it were intentional? You're going to see some great videos of us giving away a bunch of money and video people secretly. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to challenge people to serve others. There's going to be hopefully this great movement that happens. And so intentionally, if you would be intentional about inviting somebody with you when we go to 3 services and be there for that, grab one of these or maybe even more than one on your way out as well. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.